The morning sun rose slowly over the wide desert. Golden light spread across the dry land, where wind moved the sand like waves. A lone cowboy named Ethan rode quietly, his brown hat low over his eyes, dust sticking to his boots. His horse, a strong Mustang named Copper, walked beside him with steady steps. They had been together for many years. Ethan trusted that horse more than most people he knew. That morning felt different. The air was still, and even the birds were quiet. Ethan stopped by a small stream to let Copper drink. But the moment he bent to fill his canteen, Copper suddenly lifted his head and neighed loudly. Without warning, the horse broke free, galloped across the sand, and disappeared into the hills. Ethan shouted and ran after him, his voice echoing across the empty land. But Copper didn't stop. Ethan's heart pounded. That horse had never run away before. He whistled again and again, but the only answer was the sound of the wind. Ethan quickly mounted his spare horse that was tied near the stream and followed Copper's tracks. The marks in the sand were fresh. He rode fast, calling out, hoping Copper would come back. The sun climbed higher. The land grew hotter. Hours passed. Ethan's throat was dry, but he didn't give up. His heart told him something was wrong. Copper wasn't just spooked. He was leading somewhere. Ethan trusted that horse like a friend. Years ago, during a flood, Copper had dragged him out of a river and saved his life. Ethan had promised then that he would always take care of him. By noon, Ethan found signs of struggle near a rocky ridge-broken brush, footprints and a few drops of dark stain on the sand. His eyes narrowed. He followed the trail carefully until he saw a shape in the distance. It looked like Copper standing still beside something lying flat on the ground. Ethan urged his horse forward, his heart heavy with worry. When he reached the spot, he froze. A woman lay half buried in the sand. Her long black hair was tangled with dust. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes closed. She wore torn buckskin clothing that showed she belonged to the Apache people. Copper stood beside her, gently nudging her arm as if trying to wake her. Ethan dropped to his knees and touched her wrist. There was a faint pulse. She was alive, but very weak. Ethan quickly took his canteen and poured a few drops of water on her lips. Her eyelashes fluttered. Slowly, her eyes opened. They were dark, deep, and filled with confusion and fear. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Ethan smiled softly. "Don't talk," he whispered. "You're safe now." He looked around. It was clear she had been left there in the desert without help. Ethan's chest tightened. No one could survive long out here without water or shade. Whoever had left her must have thought she wouldn't make it. But fate had brought Copper to her instead. Ethan carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light as a feather. He wrapped her in his coat and mounted his horse, holding her close. "You found her, boy," he said to Copper. "Now, let's get her home." The ride back to his cabin was slow and silent. The sun dropped behind the hills, turning the sky red and purple. The woman trembled now and then, whispering soft words in her own language that Ethan couldn't understand. He spoke to her gently. "Hold on. We're almost there." He covered her with his coat and rode through the cool evening wind. When he reached his small wooden cabin near the edge of the desert, he took her inside. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a fireplace, a bed, and a table. But it was warm and safe. Ethan laid her carefully on his bed and went straight to work. He boiled water, washed her face, and gave her tiny sips to drink. He used some herbs his mother had once taught him to treat fever. As he worked, he remembered his mother's words, "Always help those who cannot help themselves." Ethan. That's the mark of a real man. All through the night, he watched over her. Her breathing was shallow at first, but slowly it steadied. Ethan kept the fire burning and sat by her side, sometimes dozing in his chair but waking at every sound. At dawn, a soft light entered the cabin. The woman opened her eyes again. Her gaze moved slowly around the room, studying the shelves, the window, and the man sitting quietly nearby. When she saw him, fear flashed across her face. Ethan raised his hands gently. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "You're safe here. My name's Ethan. You were hurt, but you're going to be fine." She blinked, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. "Why, you help me," she whispered in a broken voice. Ethan smiled faintly. "Because someone should. You needed it." She looked away as if she couldn't believe kindness from a stranger. Ethan poured her more water and gave her a spoonful of soup he had made from beans. She drank slowly, her hands shaking. He saw how tired she was and didn't ask questions. He only said, "Rest now. You're safe." For the next few days, he cared for her with quiet patience. He fed her soft food, changed her bandages, and made sure she stayed warm. At night, he sat near the fire while she slept, thinking about how Copper had found her. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had been meant to happen. On the fourth day, she was strong enough to sit up. She told him her name was Tala. Her voice was gentle, and though her English was simple, her words were clear. She said she had been with her small group near the canyon when strangers attacked. She tried to protect a friend, but was struck down and left behind. When she woke, everyone was gone. For 2 days, she crawled through the sand looking for water until she could no longer move. Then Copper appeared. Ethan listened silently. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak of anger or revenge. Instead, he said softly, "You were brave." Tala's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I would die," she whispered. Ethan looked at her and said, "Not while my horse was around." From that day, a quiet bond began to grow between them. Tala helped him feed the horses, though her steps were still slow. She smiled when Copper followed her around like an old friend. Ethan watched her carefully, making sure she didn't tire herself. He noticed how calm she became around the animals and how gently she spoke to them. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Tala sat outside the cabin wrapped in a blanket. The sky burned orange and pink. Ethan joined her with 2 cups of warm coffee. They sat in silence, watching the horizon. Finally, she said softly, "You are different. Not like others I met." Ethan turned his eyes toward the fading sun. "Maybe I just listen to my horse better than most," she smiled, the first real smile since he found her. It was small but full of life. That night, the desert wind grew strong and the cabin walls creaked. Tala couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring at the dancing flames. Ethan noticed her shivering and handed her another blanket. "Storm will pass," he said. "They always do." She nodded. "In my tribe, we believe storms test the heart. Only those who stay calm through them find peace later." Ethan looked into the firelight. "I reckon that's true." When the storm finally quieted, a deep calm filled the night. Ethan stepped outside to make sure the horses were safe. The air smelled clean and fresh after the rain. Inside, Tala whispered a quiet prayer in her language, thanking the spirits for saving her. As Ethan returned, he saw her sitting by the firelight, her eyes soft, her face calm. In that moment, he realized how much peace her presence brought into his quiet life. She had been a stranger left to die. But now she was someone who had given his lonely cabin a reason to feel alive again. And deep down, Ethan knew this was only the beginning of something larger than either of them could understand, something that had started the moment. His horse decided to run across the desert that morning. Days passed peacefully on the ranch, and Tala's strength slowly returned. She walked a little more each morning, feeding the horses with gentle hands and watching the sun rise over the distant hills. Ethan saw the color return to her face and the sparkle return to her eyes. It made him quietly proud. She had come back from the edge of death with courage that amazed him. One evening, Ethan sat outside fixing a broken saddle strap while Tala brushed Copper's mane. The horse stood calmly, loving her soft touch. Ethan smiled to himself. "He likes you," he said. Tala looked over and smiled shyly. "He found me first," she said. "Maybe he knew I was still alive." Ethan nodded. "Maybe he did. Horses know more than we think." After dinner, they shared stories. Ethan told her about his childhood near the Rio Grande, about his parents and the small herd of cattle they once owned. He spoke about losing his family in a storm years ago, and how he built his cabin alone, piece by piece. Tala listened quietly, her eyes filled with understanding. Then she spoke about her people, their dances, and how they believed every life was part of a bigger circle. Ethan didn't understand everything, but he felt her words deeply. Their days grew warmer and easier. Ethan taught Tala how to saddle a horse, and she taught him how to braid strong rope from desert grass. They cooked together, laughed over burnt bread, and sometimes sat in silence watching the stars. The silence between them was never empty, it was peaceful, like they both knew words weren't always needed. One afternoon, while collecting firewood near the canyon, Tala stopped suddenly. Her expression changed. Ethan followed her eyes and saw smoke far off in the distance. "It's from a camp," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. "My people. They might be searching." Ethan's heart beat faster. He knew this day would come. "Do you want to go to them?" he asked softly. Tala looked toward the smoke and then back at him. "I don't know if they will want me," she whispered. "They may think I am gone." Ethan put down the wood he was carrying and stepped closer. "You're alive. That's what matters. Maybe they need to see that." The next morning, Ethan saddled 2 horses. He packed water, bread, and dried meat for the journey. Tala wore a clean dress he had found in a storage trunk, tied with a simple rope at the waist. She looked different, now strong, calm, almost glowing under the morning light. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. The ride through the desert was long and quiet. They followed the canyon trail until they reached a line of cottonwood trees. By afternoon, they saw figures moving near a small fire in the distance. Tala's hands trembled slightly. Ethan stopped the horse and looked at her. "You don't have to go if you're not ready," he said. "I must," she said softly. "They are my family." Ethan waited as she dismounted and walked slowly toward the camp. A few people turned when they saw her. At first, there was silence, then a cry of surprise. 2 older women ran forward, shouting her name. They embraced her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Ethan watched from a distance, a faint smile on his lips. He knew this was right. She belonged with her people. He turned his horse to leave quietly, not wanting to interrupt their reunion. But before he could go far, Tala called out, "Ethan?" Her voice carried across the sand. He stopped and turned. She ran toward him, her dress fluttering in the wind. "Please don't go," she said, breathing hard. "They want to meet you. They must thank you." Ethan scratched his neck, unsure what to say. "You don't owe me thanks, Tala. You're safe. That's all I wanted." But she shook her head. "You saved me. That means you are part of our story now." He followed her back to the camp. Her people looked at him with curiosity, some with suspicion. But Tala stood beside him proudly and told them how Copper had found her and how Ethan had carried her back from death. As she spoke, their faces softened. The oldest man in the group stepped forward, placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder, and said words he didn't understand. Tala translated softly. He says, "The spirits guided you. They thank you." They invited him to stay for the night. Around the fire, they shared food and sang songs in their native tongue. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he felt the warmth behind them. Tala smiled often, happier than he had ever seen her. The next morning, Ethan prepared to leave. "You belong here," he said gently. "With your people." She looked at him, her eyes suddenly sad. "And you?" she asked. "Where will you go?" He smiled faintly. "Back to the ranch. The horses need me." She lowered her gaze, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she whispered, "I will come back to thank you again." Ethan nodded and tipped his hat before riding away. Weeks passed. Ethan worked alone again. The ranch was quiet without her laughter. He tried to keep busy fixing fences, mending gear, tending to Copper, but something felt missing. Each evening he looked toward the horizon where the canyon met the sky, wondering if she was all right. Then one afternoon, as he was feeding the horses, he heard the sound of hooves. He turned quickly. There she was, riding toward him with a calm smile. Tala had returned. Behind her, a few men from her tribe carried gifts, handmade blankets, pottery, and a carved wooden horse. She dismounted gracefully and walked to him. "My chief sent these," she said softly, "to thank you." Ethan looked at the gifts and then at her. "You didn't have to come all this way. I wanted to," she said. The desert feels empty without this place. She looked around the cabin with gentle eyes. You saved my life, but you also gave me something more. Hope. Ethan smiled slowly. And you gave this old ranch life again, she laughed softly. For the next few days, she helped him with chores as if she had never left. They fixed the fence together, rode through the hills, and cooked by the fire at night. They talked about simple things, whether horses, stars, but every word carried warmth. One night, as they watched the sunset, Tala said quietly, My people want me to stay with them, but part of me feels my spirit belongs here too. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You don't have to choose right now, he said gently. Sometimes life has a way of deciding for us. She nodded, looking at the horizon. Maybe the spirits already have. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of rain. Copper snorted and leaned his head against Ethan's shoulder, as if reminding him how it all began. Tala smiled and touched the horse's mane. He led you to me, she said. Maybe he knew we both needed saving. Ethan laughed quietly. Smartest horse I ever met. In the days that followed, Tala often visited. Sometimes she stayed for a night, sometimes for several days. The people of her tribe accepted that she walked between two worlds now, their own and the quiet ranch where kindness had changed her life. Ethan never asked her to stay forever. He didn't need to. Every time she came back, it felt as if the desert itself approved. One evening, when the sky was full of stars, Tala sat beside the fire and looked at Ethan. Do you ever think about that day? She asked softly. The day Copper ran away? Ethan nodded. Every day. I thought I lost him. Turns out, he just went to find someone I was meant to meet. Tala smiled warmly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Maybe he was following the call of something greater. Ethan looked into the flames and said quietly, Maybe love doesn't always come with words or plans. Sometimes it just rides in from the desert. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. The wind outside whispered across the sand, carrying the faint sound of coyotes far away. The night was calm, peaceful, and full of life. From that moment on, Ethan and Tala continued to live between two worlds, his quiet ranch and her tribal camp. They met often under the open sky, sharing stories, laughter, and silence. The desert that had once nearly taken her life had now given them both something rarer, reason to believe in fate again. And sometimes, when Ethan woke before dawn, he would see Copper standing outside, looking toward the horizon as if remembering that long ride. Ethan would smile and whisper, Good work. Old friend? Then he'd look toward the rising sun, knowing that somewhere out there, Tala was looking at the same sky, thinking the same thought, because the cowboy who had followed his horse hadn't just found an Apache woman left to die, he had found a soul meant to walk beside his. No matter how wide the desert stretched between them,